Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we get into the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. I say it every week. It's our lifeline. It's how we keep going week in, week out. And we're going to have some exciting new bits and pieces on there soon. Mags has now finished her thesis. Congratulations, Mags.
Thank you. It's a whole new world.
So you're going to have some more time. We're going to hopefully invest some more time into the podcast, get the Patreon a bit more together and uniform and cohesive, all these wonderful words, and get some new content on there and perks. So keep your eye out. But if you do like what we do, go and check out Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. That's from £3 a month, and there's already some great tiers and rewards on there. So you get a bonus episode we do with our guests every single week, which is a bumper part to every show. Sometimes they're an extra 15 minutes, sometimes they're an extra hour. Who knows what's going to happen? Pretty much like the podcast, I guess. But they're an added little bit where you can ask some questions if you want. You can jump in and watch live, ask the guests your questions, or we just have a bit of a deeper chat. The guests tend to let their hair down a little bit in those extra episodes. So do go and check them out. There will be one for pretty much every episode we've done, bar like maybe the first 100. And get access to our Discord community. And you get early access to all the episodes. If you can't subscribe on Patreon, then just a like, share, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram. All those things do help new people.
If you watch this episode on YouTube, you will get the chance to see my bangs drying in real time, since I did not have the time to dry them before recording.
Well, that's, you know what? I would subscribe just for that. With that said, that voice, look what the cat dragged in this week. Mags you've been 3 weeks you've been away, I think?
Yeah.
Finishing your thesis?
Yeah, finishing my thesis. We got there, guys.
But it's done. So that voice is my lovely co-host and in-house archaeologist, Mags Havgar.
Was I supposed to say something there?
No, you know what, Mags, just leave me hanging. I don't mind. It's fine.
It's been a while, I have to get back into it.
Yeah, well, you know what. And then, all right, so our guest today is, you know what, Hilbert, I'm going to do it. Hilbert Gisbert. I'm going to say, okay, Vinkenoog, but it's not that. Can you pronounce it properly?
Yeah, Vinkenoog.
Okay. Nowhere near. But Hilbert is an independent researcher focusing on early medieval Frisia. He read Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic at the University of Cambridge, followed by a master's degree in Viking and medieval studies from Oslo University. And you're well known for your YouTube channel, History with Hilbert. Hilbert, thank you for joining us.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here and to talk probably at far too great lengths about early medieval Frisia, as I want to do.
I would love to see everybody's face when I said your complex 3-language name, and then they hear a somewhat Geordie accent.
Newcastle accent.
Yeah. And they're like, people are going to be like, what the?
It does throw people off the scent a little bit. But I guess it's no surprise that I wound up looking at North Sea connections with all of these various places and backgrounds. Just thought I'd sneak that one in there.
That's good branding right there.
Yeah. So you grew up in Newcastle to Dutch parents, you said?
Yeah, pretty much. Dutch parents, not in the city itself, but close enough to have picked up the accent. Started getting interested in, well, why do we have words in Geordie that sound an awful lot like words in Dutch and in Frisian, but aren't used in standard English? Had my Lord of the Rings phase, and then went down the route of, well, where's the inspiration for Lord of the Rings come from? And I think I won't be the only one here.
As we do.
Yeah.
I'm already intrigued. Do we have any examples of words that are in Geordie, but we don't use in English?
Yeah, so I think a good one, I mean, Dan, you're obviously a proud Yorkshire man, so you'll probably understand. And of course, Mags in Norwegian, there's also a cognate. The one that springs to mind is the word ben, which is a Geordie word for child or children. Yeah. And in Frisian, the word for child is still ben. It's pronounced exactly the same. We have a cognate in barn in Norwegian. And I don't know what your local variant of that word would be, Dan, where you grew up, but there's a few variants in Yorkshire, I think.
I think some people use burn, especially in, let's say, the more working class mining areas. I would say that'd be kind of that kind of
That's so
colloquialism.
fun. And also, just for our non-UK maybe knowledgeable people, could the two of you just quickly just what's Geordie?
That's a very good point. Thank you for asking that. Geordie essentially refers to someone who comes from or close to the city of Newcastle, which is in the northeast of England. If you think you've got England in the south, Scotland in the north, a lot closer to the Scottish part than to London, you've got a city called Newcastle upon Tyne. And there's a regional dialect that is spoken in the city and along that river, the Tyne, which is called Geordie. And that's the dialect that I grew up hearing a lot of the time in the playground and in the streets.
So is it kind of the only kind of maybe similar thing that I know of is Liverpool and Scouse? Is that kind of on the same
opposite side of the country, but same?
No, sure, but it's the same thing that is referring to okay.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a sort of an urban dialect that's very characteristic. I would say that sort of it's one of the more famous dialects that we have. That did just in England.
That did just get me thinking how both sides of the country, the east and the west, have these very kind of strong, defined accents. And I wonder if there's a reason for that, because obviously you have Scouse with Liverpool, which is very iconic, and then obviously you have Geordie up in Newcastle, which is also, I think, equally as kind of stands out in the same way. I wonder if there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I think part of it might be, obviously we used to have, if you look at dialect maps from even the 1950s, there was a huge amount of dialect variation, very strong accents as well, even very close. And in the southeast, close to London, there were many, many different dialects. But I think what's happened is with the radio, then television, we've become a lot more interconnected. And it's meant that there's been a huge decline in dialects. The interesting thing is that I think, if I remember the study correctly, it's Liverpool and Newcastle are some of the only places where the very strong regional dialect is seen positively rather than negatively, including by young people. So that might be why these are sort of bastions of this dialect, or the accent rather than the dialect, I should say, where it's clung on more. And there's a few interesting reasons why that might have occurred in these cities. I mean, football might be part of it as well. There's obviously a strong emphasis on football in both of these cities.
Yeah, they both have huge following for their teams.
It always comes back to goddamn soccer in European history, I swear to God.
Oftentimes it does. Yeah.
But you know what's funny? How often do you get mistaken for Scottish, Hilbert? Because me being from Yorkshire, I don't think the Yorkshire accent sounds anything like Scottish. But as soon as it's to anybody who doesn't have a familiar ear, particularly North Americans,
you're being so kind.
They instantly would say, "Oh, are you Scottish?" I'm like, "No, it doesn't sound anything like Scottish." So I imagine you must get it a lot.
Yeah, I think I do get it a fair amount from people, and actually from Southern England as well. I mean, it's interesting because to a certain degree, we do have a shared heritage with Scots and Scottish accents. Part of that is Northumbrian Old English. So it's that's what Scots comes out of. So we share a lot of words there. And part of it is that Newcastle industrialized quite heavily, a lot of coal mines in that area. And so you had quite a lot of emigration actually from Scotland to Newcastle. So there's sort of a second layer of connection with Scotland. But I mean, our accents, which is another interesting thing, we often get lumped together, Dan. So they say Northern English. Our accents actually don't sound very similar. If you listen to the vowels, they're completely different. But people tend to say, oh, it's a Northern English accent, but it doesn't exist.
No, mine's like...
We sound very different, and a Scouser sounds very different again.
Yeah. We have the same problem here. We're like, oh, it's just Northern, Norwegian accent. And everyone from, Northern Norway is just like, what the... We don't sound anything alike.
Yeah, Tromsø and Bodø disagree violently
Yep,
about
and then you
this,
have Alta and
yeah.
just get
But it's the same everywhere, I
Yeah.
think, that when you come from a place, it's very obvious what these distinctions are. But if you're from further away, it's harder to understand.
Yeah, and
I
you
feel
don't
like,
necessarily hear the minutia as well.
Right.
I feel that Scouse and Geordie are a little bit lighter than the Yorkshire accent. I feel like I always think that the Yorkshire accent is very much akin to putting ball bearings in a sock and beating someone. I think that's how dull our accent is. It's just very kind of monotone, miss a lot of letters out, consonants. We kind of just skip over things.
I'm just gonna imagine someone like
People
do say this, but I've had people say, "Oh,
do you not think?"
Some people have said to me, "I should read audiobooks," and I'm like, "What the fuck are you listening to?" Because I don't think that at all.
But I think the vowels are quite sort of drawn out,
Yep.
whereas Geordies and Scousers, we're a lot more kind of staccato.
Mm-hmm.
So people laugh at me how the way I say tattoo,
right?
Instead of tattoo, as other people say, or water, right? It's not water. Yeah, you miss these consonants a lot of the time.
Wonderful. Okay, right.
Anyway, we've had a discussion about but it was fun.
Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast, which goes to wherever we actually like to talk about. We get there eventually.
But I'm really excited about today's topic, like the actual topic, because when I saw the title, I was like, oh, wait, I know. Wait, no, wait, hang on. So like, we're going to talk about like medieval Frisia, right? So I'm wondering, I feel like I should know this, but like, what is Frisia and where is it?
You know, Max, that is the perfect question. And people have been racking their brains about this question basically since the Roman period.
Oh, thank God. So it's not just me.
Don't worry, it's not just you. And there's some interesting reasons why, if we were to say, you know, this is an episode about Anglo-Saxon England, this is an episode about Scandinavia or Denmark, we'd all know what we're talking about, but we don't know when it comes to Frisia, which is weird, right? Because it's in the middle of these two places. It's sort of the bottom third of the North Sea triangle, but we're not quite as fluent in understanding where Frisia is, who are Frisians.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think of cattle when it comes to Frisia, right? Black and white cows, Frisian horses, maybe.
Am I right?
If you're into football, you might be thinking of the football team that wears the Frisian flag. That's where a lot of popular culture about Frisia today.
Right.
But essentially,
Frisia, where?
Yeah. So Frisia essentially is the coastal area in what is today the Netherlands and northern Germany and a part of the German-Danish border. Many of these areas are still today called Friesland, Ostfriesland in Germany, Nordfriesland. There's several islands there. And in the Netherlands, there's a province called Friesland. But historically, this area was actually a lot larger. So it incorporates also Holland, which is kind of a central area of the Netherlands, Zeeland in the south, essentially right the way to the Belgian border, that whole coastline up the German coast, up to Schleswig-Holstein, and then several of these North Frisian islands all the way to Denmark. So it's a very extensive area.
So it doesn't go into France?
It doesn't go into France, no.
That was my answer, it's obviously North France.
Yeah, North France. No, it's not quite there. I mean, and this picture changes, so it depends a little bit on what part of the Middle Ages that we're talking about.
Right.
But these borders are written down in a Frankish law code that's from the late 8th century that refers to Frisia as being between this area of the river Weser on the one side and the Sinkfall on the other. The Sinkfall is completely silted up, it's gone, but it's essentially where the Dutch-Belgian border is today. And then we also have this area to the north, which is essentially used to be a part of Denmark. It's now a part of Germany.
Schleswig-Holstein,
yeah, that's also a complicated one. Yeah, so that's the where part of the of where we can find this area, Frisia. But there's a lot of questions as to, well, was this one country, nation at any point?
Right.
Did these people all think that they were Frisians. And where did the Frisian languages come into it? Because we have several Frisian languages today that all come from an original Frisian language that we have being spoken in this area that is very closely related to English, as well as to Low German, but mainly with English.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
So it's often said that if we discount Scots as a language, then Frisian is the closest language alive to English. There's three main branches of the Frisian languages today. There's West Frisian, East Frisian, and North Frisian. The type of Frisian that I speak is called West Frisian. It's the biggest of the three, and it's spoken in the Netherlands, in the province of Friesland. There's an area in Germany, which is fairly close to the Dutch border in what used to be or is East Frisia, where around 2,000 people speak a variant of East Frisian. And then in North Frisia, as ever, it's complicated in Schleswig-Holstein. So there's, I don't know quite how many variants there are, but pretty much every island there at one point had its own Frisian language. And then there's several that are also spoken on the mainland. And there's still around, I think it's about 10,000 speakers of the various North Frisian variants that are alive today.
So just to kind of get like my first like kind of dumb question out of the way, just to clarify, Frisian is not then the same as, say, Dutch. Even though people in the Netherlands speak it, it is not equivalent to Dutch.
Right. So Frisian is today the second official language of the Netherlands.
Gotcha.
It's been recognized since the 1950s as being the second official language. In Friesland, where I live, it's taught at school. You can use it in court. It's used in the local government. And it's a related language to Dutch. They're both West Germanic languages. And through the ages, Dutch has influenced a lot of pressure and influence on Frisian. So there's quite a lot of loan words, but they are separate languages. They're not mutually intelligible. If I speak Frisian to someone who isn't from here and they speak Dutch, chances are they won't get the gist. They might get the gist, but they won't get the minutiae of what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you can understand some Frisian, actually. So I'll say there's
I was just about to ask
us,
that.
It's a famous Shibboleth. Let's see if we can get it. I'm gonna go for it. Boterbrei en green cheese is good Engels and good Fries.
Wait, hang on. One more time.
Okay.
I'll do it a bit slower.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Boterbrei en green cheese is good Engels and good Fries.
Okay, something about like foodstuffs.
Yes.
Are we talking like my brain now is in both Norwegian and English going like
it's cheating. You have two languages.
Because I'm like there's some, was it goat cheese or like butter making or something like that, and being good for
butter
something.
And cheese both appear. Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe the rolling R's are putting you off, but if you listen to it and think I'll change that into an English R, it becomes easier.
Okay.
So butter.
Yeah, butter.
Okay. Yeah, brei.
Bread. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I got it.
Green cheese.
What was the first part of that cheese?
Green.
Green? No.
Yeah, it's green.
Green cheese.
Butter bread, green cheese.
Yeah. Is good Engels.
Is good for something? Or
Engels. And good Fries.
It's good.
It's right there. Why can't I?
It's actually, Norwegian will help you more in this case, I think. For the word engelsk, it ends in a K.
Yeah.
Good engelsk.
Because I'm hearing god engelsk, so like good English is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, bra. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. It's good English.
Oh, it is.
And good Frisian. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So I was like, but that doesn't make sense.
So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Don't ask me what green cheese is. I feel like that might be cheese that should have been thrown out a long time ago, but I don't know.
I feel like you tricked us, Hilbert, with a nonsensical sentence.
So butter, bread, and green cheese is good English?
And Frisian.
And good Frisian.
And good
yeah,
Frisian.
And good Frisk.
Obviously.
Yeah. And the cool thing about this is that we actually have attestations of this being used right the way through history, that people have noticed that English and Frisian are related languages and commented about this. So in Friesland, I'm currently in Haas, the city of Harlingen in the Netherlands. Every place here has two names because we're very bilingual, sometimes more. But if you go a couple of kilometers down the road, you come to a village called Kimsved. And there's a legendary figure from here, a historical figure, I suppose, called Grote Pier, which means great Pier. Pier was his name. And he was a giant who fought against Hollanders and other enemies. And when he would capture people, he'd want to see, well, are they Frisians or are they Hollanders? Are they the enemy? Mm-hmm. And it's said that he would force them to say this because Dutch people can't make these Frisian sounds. So he'd suss out who was Frisian and who was Dutch. And on that basis, he'd see whether he'd let them go or not. That's how the story goes.
Okay, well, actually, this is really interesting to me based on our introductory discussion on, Geordie and Newcastle and minutia of like dialects, because I must admit, to my ears, I couldn't necessarily tell that this wasn't Dutch. So what are like the distinguishing sounds between Frisian and Dutch?
Very good question. Why don't I say it again in Frisian and then say it in Dutch?
Yes, please.
And then, yeah. So I'll just do the first bit. So in Frisian, boter, brei en groene cheese. In Dutch, boter, brood en groene kaas.
Okay, yep, gotcha. Okay, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So Dutch is a lot more like German in some ways. Mm-hmm. We obviously have that guttural sound, which Frisian doesn't have at the start of words. So it's a bit more like English in that way.
I see.
So that's where we say good and green and things like that. So it's a bit softer on the ears.
Yeah.
If we're thinking about that.
That's so funny how the first time you said it, I was like, I can't understand a single word of that. This is nonsense. But then the third time you said it, just then after you told us what it was, I'm like, oh yeah, of course it is. I can hear it now.
Right. And that's the joy of studying Frisian, because I grew up bilingual with Dutch and English, but my dad spoke Frisian as well. So when I was around 15, 16, I said, oh, well, I want to learn Frisian as well. And the great joy of learning Frisian is that you come across so many words that are related to English words all the time. So another word is together.
Together?
Which is just together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, once you say it, I'm like, yeah.
There's many examples like this, which are really fun to come across.
What is it, Frisia? What is it akin to, like a kingdom, a country, a group of people?
That's another million shatter question right there, Dan. That's perfect.
I pulled a little map up over here,
and essentially you're in luck because they're at the Fries Museum, which is in Ljouwert, the capital of Friesland. There's an exhibition which is set to launch next month. And essentially, there's a project that involves various institutions from both the Netherlands and Germany that have tried to answer exactly this question. What exactly is Frisia? Is it a kingdom? And it might be a good time to introduce sort of the main character of early medieval Frisian history. Very exciting.
Well, also, what time period are we talking? Let's maybe nail that down as well.
Yeah. So this character is called Redbad, and he's probably the most famous Frisian, and he lived from the sort of the later part of the 7th century and died in 719. So we're before the Vikings. We're kind of, the Anglo-Saxons have already largely converted, and they play a role in his story as well. And that's sort of when Frisia starts to enter the source material, which is rather interesting. This character, Redbad, we find him, that's the Frisian version of his name. He's called Radbod a lot of the time, based on the Latin version of his name as it's written down. And he's mainly famous for two things. One of them is resisting the expansion of the Frankish kingdom at the time.
That one's in France.
What will become the Carolingian Empire.
That's in France, right?
And the second is... Say again, Dan?
That one's in France, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's sort of French, Belgian, that conglomeration. And the second thing about Redbad is that he refuses baptism. And there's a very famous story surrounding this. So he remained a pagan ruler to the end. And this project that I talked about, I was very lucky to be asked to write 2 chapters or co-write 2 chapters for this project. And it's a very long title, but I will put it all in there because it essentially answers the question. Okay. The title of the publication that is set to appear is Redbad, King of the Frisians, New Perspectives on Kingship in Early Medieval Frisia and the Development of a Coastal Identity.
There you go.
So that is that question, Dan, in one title. Yeah. There's about 15, 16 chapters with about 30 different authors from various disciplines and countries. And also representation from Norway.
Oh, wow.
From my
cool.
colleague Petter Jensen, who has written on the chapter, which is great. And we essentially try to answer the question of who was this figure of Redbad, because there's a huge debate about, is he this king of this large Frisian area, or is he kind of just a Frankish aristocrat at the edge? And that's kind of the perspective, that second one, that has prevailed until now. And I think part of that is because of Frisia's peculiar situation, because we find it independent in this early medieval period into the later Middle Ages. The central part, so what is in the northern Netherlands and in Germany, remains outside of feudal Europe, which is a great exception because they rule themselves and they claim that the Frisian freedom, as it's called, is given directly from the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, to the Frisians.
Wow.
And so they never recognize feudal overlordship. They write their own law codes in Old Frisian, and they essentially rule themselves. And that situation lasts right the way into essentially the end of the 15th century when it all collapses.
That's a long time.
It's a very long time, which is really interesting to compare it to what's happening in other places.
Yeah, so we're talking like you call I'm sorry, what was his name again?
Redbad the king.
Redbad, yeah. So you said that he died in approximately 719 AD. So for our very like Viking-minded listeners, that would be like right before like the very start of what we sometimes recall like the Viking Age. That we sometimes say it starts in the middle of the 700s, and then it lasts until way after. Way after.
Well, yes, and I'm really glad you picked up on that, Mags, because the interesting thing with the conquest of Frisia into this Carolingian empire, as it will become, is that it happens in 3 stages. And when Redbad dies, the Franks take over one part of Frisia up to the river, the Flee. And they only conquer central Frisia under Charles Martel in 734. And East Frisia, so the easternmost extreme, is only conquered in the middle of the 780s?
Oh.
Consolidated in the 790s. And they take part in all these Saxon uprisings. And the first Viking activity that we have in Frisia is in 810. Oh. So it's really close together, right?
Holy crap.
King Godfred from Denmark, he raids Frisia, claims overlordship over Frisia as well. So this is really one of those stepping stones to the Viking Age. I think a lot of people are aware that the Saxon uprising, that's with a lot of violence. There's a religious element with Charlemagne. But I think Frisia is equally important in this story because it's just that consolidation of Frankish power right the way up to the Danish border.
So if they're conquered by the Frankish Empire, did I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So, but they were but the people would still remain Frisian.
Yes, pretty much. So they are incorporated into the Frankish Empire. So sort of by the dawn of the 9th century, obviously we're in Viking territory then, it is taken over. Interestingly, the part in Schleswig-Holstein never becomes part of the Carolingian Empire, right? Okay. So they become part of this Danish empire, but the Frisian language survives there. It's still spoken there to this day. So that's also an interesting element of Frisian history. But the bulk of Frisian territory becomes part of the Carolingian Empire. Then throughout the course of the 10th, 11th century, they sort of drift a little bit. And then in the High Middle Ages, you get this Frisian freedom, this period when they are essentially ruling themselves, but subordinate to the Holy Roman Empire. And that then disappears by around 1500. And I think that's very important for why this exhibition and this research is being done now, and why I also had to explain where Frisia was, because if you now look on the map, there isn't a country called Frisia, right? So it gets divided at that point. It's quite a long and complicated process, so I won't go into all the details, but essentially you've now got two countries, the Netherlands and you've got Germany, and Frisia is divided between these areas. And that's largely why Frisian history hasn't really been studied as much as these other areas, because it doesn't fit neatly within those national narratives, right? The Netherlands comes about during the Dutch Revolt, so that's in the latter part of the 16th century. It's to do with the Reformation, the fight against the Spaniards. That was when we got our independence. And Friesland, as one of the states, becomes part of this Dutch Republic. Way down the line, the French take over with Napoleon, and after Napoleon is defeated, we get a kingdom in the Netherlands that is a centralized kingdom, and then Friesland loses any kind of autonomy or say, and within this new kingdom of the Netherlands, it's no longer really acceptable to talk about this older Frisian history, because, well, I mean, that could be a secession crisis waiting to happen, right?
You want to make sure that, like, all these amalgamations have to stay intact.
Exactly. Yeah. So then it's also very useful to have this, well, you've got this older Frisian history, but were they really united, or probably they were just sort of peripheral or aristocrats? That kind of fits the story a little bit better. It's very neat, it's very comfortable, and it means that that's largely based on sources that are written by the Franks themselves. So the trouble is that the Frisians aren't writing
just a little bit of bias,
down.
Just a little bit of bias,
just a tiny little bit. Yeah, it's very convenient that they didn't have their own kingdom and that they were actually just a sort of small scale lord going on rather than a king.
Yeah.
So there is that to take into account as well, that the written material is largely from Frankish sources, but then we also get these very interesting saints' lives or hagiographies from Anglo-Saxons who are coming over. Because we mentioned, obviously, already these connections in language between English and Frisian. And I mean, you guys were great. You managed to crack my Frisian sentence within about 2 minutes.
Well, you're
but
being
if we
way
go
too
back
kind
around 1,000 years, the connections are even stronger, right? So Old English and Old Frisian, or really Proto-Old Frisian, were mutually intelligible to every degree. So that's maybe why Anglo-Saxons are so good at going and spreading the gospel in Frisia, because they essentially were speaking dialects of a same language, or a language that was still developing into Frisian and into English. So then we get some interesting English accounts about Frisia as well.
That's so cool. Can I also say, this might not, might be completely off base here, but what kind of the way you explained how Frisia eventually became part of the Frankish Empire, which then becomes the Carolingian Empire, for some reason in my mind, I'm like, also this might kind of be, a bit ironic considering that they were enveloped into the Frankish Empire. But the picture in my head is that I just imagine Frisia as like a variant of the Gallic village in Asterix and Obelix. Yeah. Her just like holding out against the Roman Empire. She's like, no.
I like that image a lot. Yeah. And that's kind of how it reads a little bit, that they are just always troublesome, because even when they're incorporated, and Nelleke Eisenacher has wrote her PhD thesis on this about Frisians in the Viking Age, is that they're always sort of being naughty, almost like the Frankish sources are saying, we constantly have to keep those Frisians in check. And they're sort of between the lines, you read that they're sort of working together with the Vikings, maybe not being as good Christians as they should be. So there's an amazing neck ring from Senja. We talked about northern Norway earlier, and I mean the Senja fjord. And there it says something like it's a couple of stanzas in verse, and it's inscribed in runes, and it says something like, we visited the lads in Frisia and we divided the shares of war. And initially that was interpreted as being, well, we went and raided the Frisians, because that's the Frankish perspective, right? Of, oh, they're Christian and they're part of our empire. But actually looking, I think it's Case Somplonius who mentioned this first, and then Nelleke Eisenacher goes deeper into it. It actually, a more likely interpretation might be we banded together with the Frisians and then went plundering, because the Frisians are also famous for being pirates in this period. So there's a lot of colluding and sort of being a little bit naughty and pagan still down the line.
Well, I mean, it is very coastal, and that's obviously for a reason. That I imagine they're very much seafaring people. Were they outwardly attacking in the same way that the Vikings did?
I think there's traces of that. So some of these old Frisian law codes, which are written down several hundred years later, there's currently a very ongoing debate about how old the laws within the manuscripts are, right? Because these manuscripts might be 13th century, but I mean, the language is older, but then it's, well, how old and how do you date that? And they refer to what happens when someone who is taken as captive by the Vikings comes back to Frisia, and then how can we determine whether he should inherit his land again? But it's very interesting, and this is the point that Eisenacher makes about this, is that it specifies that this is if they were taken involuntarily from Frisia to join Viking raids. So if you read that, then it also suggests that there maybe were people who went voluntarily.
Yeah, because it's like,
and
why would you have to specify?
Why
would you have to specify involuntarily?
Right, exactly. That's kind of the point about it. And while you find figures like part of this great army that visits England in the 9th century is called Ubba Dux Frisionum, right? So the Duke of the Frisians. There's good evidence to suggest that a large chunk of the army that sort of goes and annoys the Anglo-Saxons in that period was based in Frisia beforehand. We get Vikings who are given benefices, so essentially territories at the mouths of major rivers to kind of look after for the Franks, because the Franks don't know what to do with Frisia. I described it as their Achilles heel at one point, because it's very long, it's very drawn out. I realize I've actually forgotten to, I have labeled some books, and I can maybe show a map.
Of course.
Largely because the map has a fun name.
Visual aids.
Hopefully this is visible.
Okay, there's a bit of glare from, there we go.
Oh, okay.
Is that a bit better?
Yeah.
This is essentially Frisia, and it's this long, drawn-out area, as you can see. It's a very thin strip that's habitable. So it's just those sort of bits in yellow. You can see the dots. I'm not sure how clear this is, but those are settlements that we found.
Oh.
We call this the banana kaart, which means the banana map.
Because I was about to say,
like
I was like, banana?
Right. It's very long, stretched out territory. And we think that probably Redbad, we know that he was using ships because he sails down. I'm not sure which river it is exactly. My riverine geography isn't the best, but he sails down and attacks Cologne at some point. So we think maritime power was probably very important for the Frisians, and that might explain why, yes, it's a very large area, but it's mainly a very long area. The habitation is actually in quite a thin zone along the coastline. And that is something that maybe we should specify as well, that if you visit the Netherlands today, it's very sort of cutesy, it's picturesque, you know, there's tulip fields and there's nice neat little houses and windmills and dikes, sea walls that separate the land. This is completely wrong for this period. This is all man-made. These dikes get built in, some are a little bit earlier, but essentially the 11th century, the 12th century, this is when big dikes go up.
Oh, wow.
Before this, it's a floodplain. So the central Frisia, so today's Friesland and Groningen and Ostfriesland in Germany, are a large floodplain. So the way people survived was to pile up earth and make sort of man-made hills. We call these Terpen in Frisian and in Dutch, and in German they have a few words, Woerten and Waf and things like that. And people would build their settlements on top of these Terpen. And then when the flood would come, the water would rise up And then in the words of Pliny the Younger, they would look like shipwrecked sailors sat on top of their little man-made hills. He wasn't a fan, but I
Goddamn,
think
Pliny
it's
had to
pretty cool.
he had to have an opinion about everything, didn't he?
He really did, yeah.
Mm.
And if you visit Friesland and Groningen today, even here in Haas, the church, there aren't any hills in this part of the Netherlands, but you'll find hills at the center of pretty much every old village, and that is still the base of this terp that was built all those years ago. And you can see them in the landscape, these little hills. And the cool thing is, in the 19th century, they figured out that that soil was really fertile, and people had actually forgotten that they were man-made. They said, oh, well, obviously people built their houses on these conveniently placed hills in the floodplain. That makes sense. But when they dug into them for this fertile soil, they started to find all of these amazing remains from the early Middle Ages, like cutting into a cake and finding these settlements still in place, wicker fences, house plots, and amazing jewelry, which is the next point that I want to bring up. I'm sort of like, next slide, please. But I'm just holding up a book.
Oh,
how do you man make a hill? How when you say
you take a shovel and
but how big of a hill are we talking? Because anyone that's been to Yorkshire, we have hills,
proper hills.
So we talking like big hills, like proper, or are we talking like a hill with one house on?
So that's how they started. Is we can tell that they're already doing this around, I think, 500 BC is when they start piling up earth for these hills. They're not huge. They're not like mountains, but they're several meters in height.
How do I call it? Like landscape speed bumps in a way.
Sort of, yeah. I think they begin with one house on top of them, and then naturally they tend to grow because obviously people have refuse and they have rubbish, and then it sort of starts to pile up, and then maybe one terp, there'd be one placed nearby, and then they sort of grow together over time, and eventually you get whole villages on these terpen. But what I wanted to show you is, and I'll try and avoid the glare here.
Wait, that looks very familiar.
Right?
Yeah, that looks like the ochre brooch.
Where's that one from?
It's from Orchid in Norway. It's extremely has a similar types of inlays. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to make it up, but I was like, wait, I've seen something like that before. When's that from?
Well, I was thinking Sutton who. But...
yes, that's one. But it's there are things in Norway, in Denmark, in England that are very reminiscent of this style. Is that orca with the A and the?
I'll find a picture of it.
But yeah, this is from the first half of the 7th century. Is usually when it's dated, and they're garnets that are inlaid in there. It's a disc-on bow brooch from Vinam or Wijnaldum in the Netherlands, and I mean this was the objects like these are increasingly being found by metal detectorists in these areas in the terp land, and obviously when you're finding objects like this, you're no longer thinking, I mean, peripheral, small-scale lordship. We're thinking Sutton who, I mean, Orca, we're thinking, someone with serious clout is controlling the trade routes and having these things made. So that, again, is research that has gone into this story about Redbad and who he exactly is. How is he resisting this expansion of Frankish power for a significant number of years, and just how big was his kingdom?
I mean, that's fascinating. Hang on. Also, I found pictures of both the Sutton Hoo brooch and the Åkespenna brooch.
Well, whilst you pull that up, Max, is there any correlation between the two names? Because obviously people take Sutton Hoo to be red-walled. Now, to my ears, that sounds quite similar to the gentleman in Frisia that you mentioned. Are those names linked in any way?
Absolutely, Dan. I mean, they are cognates. The first element there, right? The rad or the red. It's the word for council in these languages,
rod.
And they often come together. Yeah, rod in or raad in Dutch, rie in Frisian. It's changed a little bit, but they're often used in these names that we find. So we have looked at the relationship between Frisia and between various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, because it might be interesting to mention that and then we'll get on to the brooches, because they are beautiful and distracting in the background.
I'm so sorry.
But it might no, that's it's good to see them there and to compare them. But
Mags, my anxiety would be rife right now, having my screen shared like this while we just watch.
Yeah, and I can't see you guys. So yeah.
I would be like, oh my god, please don't pop up. Even though I have nothing to pop up, I would still be terrified.
You know what, Dan? I live such a PG life that I'm not scared.
There you go.
Hilbert, please continue. Yeah.
No problem. No, I mentioned Pliny the Younger before, and when he arrives in this area, he describes a few different people groups living in these marshlands. One of them he describes as being called the Frisi. So we can recognize this name Frisian. So it's already a really old name. But what's interesting is that it seems that at some point in the 4th century, large parts of this coastal area were completely abandoned by the people that were living there. So we see in the Terpen archaeology, for example, that there is a habitation hiatus when everyone sort of clears out and leaves. That might have to do with a bit of climate change. It might have to do with kind of what I call post-Roman withdrawal syndrome. And we then see that after about a century, a new group or groups of people move into these abandoned Terpen, and they have a different style of pottery for the most part. They use different settlement plans and house styles, and they bring funky runes along, which is really fun. And when we look at all of those things that they bring, we can tell that they're coming from areas of where we associate with the Saxons, the Angles, and later there's a bit of jute nonsense that comes along as well from Jutland based on the metalwork. So that's partially why these metalworking traditions look so familiar, because they're kind of the same people, right? It's that from that cultural milieu. It's part of this movement that also ends with the what we would call for shorthand the Anglo-Saxons moving into Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also why these languages are probably very related, that they are keeping up contacts on both sides of the North Sea. I guess in Denmark and Norway, there's a few of these linguistic features as well, right? Like why you say kirke instead of kerk, for example. It's tjerke in Frisian, church. That's why we have a cheese in Frisian, not a gas. I guess Norwegian, you have ost, the older words, instead of the Latin loan. But there we go. So that sort of explains this connection. And that was sort of the breakthrough in thinking that led to this new research, this book being spearheaded by Han Nijdam of the Frisian Academy, the Friesche Academie, and Diana Spiekhout of het Fries Museum. And it's the idea that instead of seeing Redbad through Frankish sources, written sources, Christian sources, no, we need to view him within his own cultural milieu. And that is a North Sea milieu, looking across to Scandinavia, looking at Anglo-Saxon England, and then trying to understand part of his puzzle rather than seeing him through these foreign bias glasses all the time. And that's kind of what we've tried to do, hence the development of this coastal identity, which is part of that long title.
I mean, that is just wonderful, because I love how projects like that pop up now more and more, seemingly, at least. I might be biased here, but I feel like there are more and more of them popping up, because just when you say kind of like, well, maybe we should look at him within his own cultural context and not just the view of other people. It just sounds like such like a duh thing to do, but at the same time it's funny how often we can become kind of biased in our interpretations of history, I feel, due to the sources that are left, written sources predominantly.
I think so. And I think in the Netherlands, study of this period has largely been focused around these sources. I mean, which are great. I love written sources. They're fascinating. There's some amazing stories, which we might come on to later, like the failed baptism saga of Redbad, which is just dramatic stuff. But again, it is coming from a sort of external perspective. And I think you have to take, in this case, at least to consider a comparative approach, which is what we can do. That obviously has its own pitfalls, complications, biases, which must also be held in consideration. But I think it does make sense to view the Frisians within this North Sea milieu, because, well, there's all this evidence in the jewelry, for example, in the languages, that these are people that they are interacting with very, very frequently in England, in southern Scandinavia. And so to see if there are new clues which emerge about him, about the Frisians. And that's essentially what will be in this book. And I'm happy to say it's going to be open access as well. So everyone's going to be able to read it, to look at it. It should drop in February. So that should be good. The exhibition in Friesland, which I would also very much recommend going to, will open at the beginning of September. I think the 5th of September is when it opens, and they've got all sorts of, well, Frisian objects, some things from Denmark as well are coming there. So it's very exciting because it's sort of Frisia's moment in the spotlight after a long time. So we're all very excited about it.
I mean, yeah, I bet. Should I stop my screen sharing, by the way? Or
did you want to say anything about the brooches before we?
I was just like, it's funny how they look alike, essentially.
They do.
Yeah,
they do.
No,
look
exactly.
Alike.
This is the Nordic Mythology podcast, and I'm aware that I've yapped a lot about history and historiography, but not so much about mythology. But I can change that right now, because I'm just looking and I'm seeing this wonderful man between beasts, as it called, from the Orkespenna on the left, and often these are connected with various mythological figures when we find this motif. Also a lot of debate around that, obviously, but when we find two birds and we find a bloke with a beard in the middle, that's often connected with, I guess you'd call him Odin in Old Norse, or perhaps Woden. And so a lot of our research as well, the 2 chapters that I was invited to co-write, we're looking at the, I guess what we now might call the religious side of the Frisians, and whether Redbad sees himself as a sacral king, because there's been a lot of interesting research into that in Scandinavia, where we're blessed with a lot more written material, albeit written down largely from later periods.
Sure, but still.
And so we've, which we can use, but we just need to be careful with them. So yeah, thank you for bringing those up, because that sort of jogged my memory that is something maybe that I should address as well.
That's cool.
Yeah, the shape of them is very similar as well. There's clearly something going on there with whether they're made in the same place or by the same style. It's
absolutely,
were things like that made in Frisia, or is there any production sites that they know of?
Yeah, a lot of this sort of very high status metalwork comes out of the ground in the region of Västergård, which is in sort of the, I suppose, the northwest corner of the province of Friesland today. So in this Terpen area, around Vinam, Wijnaldum. So that is where we would probably situate the start of this Frisian kingdom. That this is where all these royal things are coming out of the ground. A lot of them are disc on bow brooches, so like the one that I showed. We also find some bracteates, which are also very interesting. And they are, I'm not sure if I highlighted a picture of these, and I only have them kind of small. I can flick through while I yap and see if I can come across the correct chapter. But, perfect. That was ideal page pull right there. These are some bracteates. And they're essentially... They look a bit like coins, but it's thought that they're rather based on Roman medallions or Byzantine medallions showing the face of the emperor, right? And we find a lot of them in Denmark as well, and in Norway, but we get a couple of them in Frisia. And it's thought that these are of local manufacture because the styles that we see are subtly different. And someone who's done a lot of research into this, and who I would recommend reading up, is Johan Nicolai, and he's looked at the metalwork. And in 2014, he wrote a monograph called The Splendor of Power, which is a wonderful work, which has really, really lovely pictures as well, which is as much of a reason to get it as the text. But if you do read the text, then he goes through all of these areas around the North Sea, in England as well, in Denmark, in the Low Countries, Frisia. And he essentially tries to figure out, where do we have royal centers? How is power manifested in these elite in this elite metalwork that we're finding coming out of the ground, and he identifies this area as being very significant. What's interesting is that we, at one point, and I want to say it's in the 6th century, we start to see all of these artifacts from this specific area and from Kent that seem to point to very close relations to Jutland specifically. And so in Kent, it's been suggested that this may have been some kind of elite takeover from Jutland. And if we read in Bede, obviously he says, well, Kent is where the Jutes settled. Obviously, Bede's writing quite a lot later, so take that with a pinch of salt.
Sure.
But what's interesting is that in Frisia, we also have some evidence for Jutes hanging around, which is in nothing less than in Beowulf, the epic Old English poem, where we have an episode that is sort of tangential to the main narrative, which is called the Finnsburg episode. And it's about a party of Danes that shows up at a hall in Frisia, the hall of King Finn. So again, a reference to a king in Frisia. Mm-hmm. Has been dated to somewhere in the 5th century or maybe the 6th century that this occurred. And they essentially trash the place. It's sort of very Viking-like behavior, avant la lettre. But what's interesting is that we find reference to Eotna in this passage. And most likely that is referring to Jutes. That is the Old English word for Jutes, already in Frisia, causing something of a ruckus. Tolkien had the idea that there may have been Jutes on both sides. So you have Jutes in the Danish camp that come over, and then Jutes in Frisia, and that they then fight it out. So there's some sort of evidence pointing to Jutes being a presence in Frisia, perhaps connected with the creation of Frisian kingship. And a final little tidbit on that is that the leader of the Danes, and if we follow Tolkien, the Jutes, who emerges after the Danish prince Hnaf is killed, is called Hengist.
Okay.
And obviously, if we're thinking of people that are famous in Anglo-Saxon history, we have the two sort of legendary founders of Kent called Hengist and Horsa.
Oh, shit. Yeah, I did not catch that connection. I was like, wait, I should have caught that name. But, that's so fun.
So who knows? Maybe there's something there that's interesting.
I mean, yeah.
From this conversation, I've learned that I just feel sorry for Frisia. I feel like they've been the bridesmaid and overlooked.
Never the bride?
yeah, because I think most people will have heard of the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Franks.
The Vikings.
The Vikings, obviously. But Frisia seems to go under the radar. And well, even when those, where's Frisia? I was Northern France, maybe. Very ignorantly. I feel quite bad for because it is it's a good sized landmass. When if I'm assuming this map that I'm looking at is correct, it's a good area. It's much bigger than there's no date on the map, but the area of like the Saxons or the Angles or the Jutes, it's a bigger geographical area than any of those.
It is very extensive, and as I mentioned, I think part of that is for these historiographic reasons, right? And that Frisia doesn't really exist on the map today. And I guess the Jutes don't, but people kind of know where Jutland is, for example. Mm-hmm. And obviously they know the Anglo-Saxons. Oh yeah, they're the founders of England. But in the Netherlands, if you ask people, the Frisians, they won't really consider them the founders of the Netherlands, because it's a different kind of story about how the Netherlands came about. But I suppose with this project, as I said, Frisians aren't a thing of the past, right? They're not just for Christmas. We're still here. We've had a whole history. There was a whole emancipation movement to get the language recognized. There's been quite a lot of, I would say, systemic oppression of the language in the Netherlands and in Germany as well. And things are a lot better now with it being recognized. But I guess this is part of that as well, as looking at the past and trying to, I suppose, put us on the map a little bit more, which is what we're trying to do here. And one way that we might be able to do this is that actually I mentioned Han Petter before, and we looked into a lead that we got from Wijnaldum, who put us on this trail, and he's following some older scholarship as well. But we maybe have found the first reference to a Valhalla-like afterlife in Frisia in one of these hagiographies.
That's fun.
That is fun.
So it's got a little bit of backstory. So I'm not sure how long we have left and how much juice you have still got in the tank, but I can look into that a little bit if you're interested.
How long is it? Because I'm thinking
we might want to save it for the Q&A or for next episode.
Yeah, or for another.
Yeah,
is there?
That's fine by me.
Is there plenty of juice in there?
There is a fair amount of juice that could be squozen from this tale. I mean, I can give the kind of the TLDR version if that would be better rather than unpacking.
Yeah, because I've got a few little bits I want to ask to kind of wrap up little things that I'm unsure of or confused about. To put a little bow on it, then we can wrap up and do the Q&A, because then it gives us time to properly get into it. Because that sounds like a really fun topic.
That's no problem. Well, I mean, start the stopwatch. I'll try and summarize it as quickly as possible. One of these hagiographies that we've got is about a missionary called Wolfram. It's called the Vita Wolframni. And within it, we get all these typical chapters about sacrifices in Frisia and Redbad leading these sacrifices. And obviously the missionary stops them from happening. But at one point, we get a bit of a style break. How can we tell it's a bit of a style break within the narrative? Everywhere else, as in all the other Frankish sources, Redbad is referred to as dux, which is related to the English word duke, so not a king. Suddenly, in this section, he is called rex, which means king. So I was like, slipped up there, got him. But what happens in this sequence is Redbad is a pagan. He's thus far refused to convert to Christianity, but Wolfram gets him so far. And Redbad is actually stood with his foot on the baptismal font. So it's really tense situation. Everyone's looking and going, wow, is he actually going to baptized after all this time, our king? And then he asks, will my noble ancestors, will they also be in this Christian afterlife? And Wolfram has to say, well, they weren't baptized, so no, they won't be. And this is the very famous scene that people in the Netherlands will know, is that Redbad then retracts his foot from the font and says, I'd rather spend eternity in hell than with a load of paupers in this Christian heaven of yours. This is very well known, very famous scene. It's referred to all the time. Less well known is that this is followed by a dream sequence in which the devil visits Redbad and says, hey, if you don't convert, then I promise you this golden hall in the afterlife with a beautiful throne from which you will rule. And a long story short, Redbad says to one of his sub-kings, go over and see if that golden hall is there. A Christian goes with him. They go and they see this golden hall, but after making the sign of the cross, it disappears into the mud, very Gylfaginning style. And then they return and they find that Redbad has died unbaptized, and that's the end. So that's the kind of the extra bit at the end. And within that description, a dream, a devil promising a golden hall with a throne, if we compare that to some of the older skaldic poetry, then we can see a lot of similarities with what we find in Norway of these pagan rulers resisting Christian rule. Very similar things being written down, being promised. Valhut, as it's called in Old Norse, Valhalla more commonly, is often described in these kind of glowing terms. Its roof is made of shields, shield bosses glowing. There's a kenning there about pennies being involved, so being gold bright. And obviously these are the descriptions that we find in this 8th century. So it's way before we get anything in Scandinavia that is referring to a Valhalla-like afterlife. So we're very excited. We think this might be the earliest reference to something like this. And then among the Frisians. So who knows, maybe this will put Frisia on the mythology map, if anything else.
So cool.
It's really cool. but it's always the fucking Vikings always get dragged into everything, don't they?
And the worst thing is, Dad, when it hit the news in Friesland, Omroep Friesland, I just knew this would happen as well. Their title, and we didn't mention Vikings at all in this, really. We were like, it's before the Viking Age. There's some Norse poetry, blah, blah. Their headline, before the Vikings, Frisia. And here we go. Yeah, typical.
We spoke about that recently. That you kind of have to. You have to play the game as much as in the Vikings are the.
It's like a calling card. It's like the pull.
Yeah, they're the glamorous ones of this medieval Europe, aren't they? They're the ones that everybody looks up to and wants to be like. So to get noticed, you kind of have to just try in some way to link it to bring people in, and it's frustrating. But unless you play the game, then it kind of gets overlooked. Sadly, I don't agree with it, but I can see why
it does happen.
It is a thing that has to happen. And if you can find something like this that has that link, I guarantee you get a lot of people then are like, oh, well, I'd like to learn about Frisia now.
What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a book coming with Alex Harvey, who might be interesting to talk to at some point as well. And it's essentially looking at sort of why does the Viking Age happen? And we sort of go around in each chapter around various parts of the North Sea. Recurring theme with me, I know. But change the record for once. But we look at these different areas around the North Sea and we say, I mean, how were they connected around the North Sea before the Viking Age? So we wanted to call it the North Sea Age, because that's what we think that it is. And we think the Vikings really sort of, they kind of disrupt that a little bit, but also the way the connections change means that it's almost inevitable that it happens in some ways. But of course, it's now got to be called Dawn of the Vikings, because publisher said we have to get that title in there. So it's now Dawn of the Vikings, the North Sea Age. So you win some, you lose some, I guess. But it's that Viking effect again.
You win some by selling more books.
Yeah, precisely, Dad. Yeah.
One of my questions before we wrap up was, do we see any migration to the British Isles? Because you see it from further afield, like we mentioned before with the Jutes, famously the Angles, the Saxons. Frisia is in that sweet spot. It's in that area. It's closer, I guess, to the British Isles, but it doesn't have that same tie to it. It's not like that. So does that happen? Is that something that is going on, or are they just not interested in this little island that everyone else seems to like?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the scope of the question about when we're asking. I think Frisia, for a large part, is more of an arrival haul rather than a departure. And that's because, as I mentioned, a large part of Frisia is depopulated in this post-Roman period. So I think it's rather the same movement of people that end up in Britain that also settle in Frisia. And some of them decide, okay, we'll stay here. And others decide we'll move on. Interestingly, there's several very large rivers in the central Netherlands, like the Rhine, the Waal, the Meuse, and so forth. In this area, archaeologically, they seem to be slightly more connected to the Frankish world. But there you actually find signs of people having come from England to the continent. So Anglo-Saxon styles that we know from England rather than from here. So there's some of that going across. The linguistic evidence is interesting as well to bring up here, because the idea used to be with a kind of, if you imagine languages as a tree with like branches and, more closely connected languages are closer together in the tree. It used to be thought that this connection between Frisian and English was because there had at one point been the same language, that there is this kind of Anglo-Frisian that was spoken on the continent, and then you have the Anglo-Saxons go over, and that's why that changes into English. Now we know that that isn't the case. From runic inscriptions in England, we can see that actually these shared features between Frisian and English that differentiate them from, say, the ancestors of Dutch and German, they develop after the migration of people into Britain in this period. And it's kind of like if you think of languages and language change, kind of like a virus. The way you speak, it's a very romantic way of thinking about it, I know. Pandemic style. Yeah. It spreads the most with people you have the closest contact to. Because if you're one person's pronouncing the word like guns and the other person's saying goose, if you speak to 10 people who pronounce it goose and only one who pronounces it guns, you're probably also going to say it that way. So that suggests there's a lot of contact between people in Britain, between people in Frisia, and then that must be dated. I mean, these changes are happening in the 6th, 7th centuries. So that's when we see it. So the people they're most closely in contact to, based on the linguistic evidence, is across the North Sea. So it's a very long roundabout way to answer the question. Sorry, one final thing. I know you're trying to keep it brief, but we do have some toponyms in England that relate. Yes, good point, Mags. A toponym is a very fancy and pretentious way of saying a place name, which is a much easier way of saying what it is. And what we find is that we have a couple of place names in England that have the element Frise or phrase. There's a lovely one called Frisbee in Lincoln, which isn't the disc that you throw, but it's rather the element Frise, which means Frisian, and B, which obviously is the Norse word for a town, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of Fristons as well. There's some Friestons, and these seem to suggest settlements of people who are identified as being Frisian. Interestingly, as with the Frisbee example, there's also some that have an Old Norse affix attached to them. So some of them might be from, going all the way back to our conversation about Frisians possibly in the Viking armies, mm-hmm. might be from this period rather than from this sort of migration period. But some of them might be older. So your Fristons, I mean, that's a frizz, and a ton is an Old English element. Yeah. So that might be going back there. So there is some element, or there's some evidence rather, for Frisians going into Britain. But I think it's slightly more complicated than listing them among Anglo-Saxons, Jutes, etc.
Well, when you mentioned the amount of rivers, at the time we're talking, they're really important. That's kind of your gateway into mainland Europe through ships. So you would assume that area would be highly important and sought after to control that small, especially the small area where you have quite a few of these rivers coalescing. You would
absolutely, Dan.
You'd really want to keep that under control.
Yeah, precisely. And this is why Redbad becomes this important figure in Frankish sources, because it's clear that he's in control of this area. From the Viking period, we know of a settlement called Dorestad, which is very frequently raided by the Vikings, but it already exists in this period. And we know that Redbad is set up in that area. If you go to the Netherlands today, it's not far from a city called Utrecht. And he's controlling this region. And this would be crucial for trade, because the heartland of the Frankish empire at this point is downriver from this area, right? So sort of your Rhineland, there's glass production, there's wine, swordsmiths, all of these high value things that they're trading with England, with Scandinavia, and obviously goods from Scandinavia and Britain and further afield are going down the river. So whoever controls that is very powerful and has a lot of advantage in these trade lanes. And so we know that Redbad is in control of this area, and that's why he comes into conflict with the Franks. We also think that he's not from this area, but they've expanded into this region from the coastal area of what is Frisia, what the Franks refer to as Frisia ulterior. So Frisia, the far Frisia, and they refer to this area, the rivers, as Frisia citerior, so the close Frisia. There's a couple of toponyms in this area, so again, place names, that involve the word Frisian as well. And that suggests that the people who are there maybe aren't considering themselves or considered Frisian, and that's why they say, oh yeah, that town over there, that's where those other people live, the Frisians live. So the Frisians have taken that over Redbad as their king, and the Franks fight them for it, and that's why they come into conflict, and that's why Redbad ends up having these squabbles with the Franks. So yeah, these river mouths, incredibly important, to control. It's what starts off this process, and maybe also why this Frisian kingdom emerges along the coast, because there's several big rivers with access to the hinterland. And so if you have a fleet, you can easily control this coastline. And that's kind of what the Vikings figure out later on as well, that actually that is the Achilles heel. They can use it to dig deep into the Frankish Empire and launch raids down these rivers. And to counter that, the Franks give it to various Danish rulers to try and sort out the problem with varying levels of success, a la Normandy later on. Yeah.
Wonderful. The other thing that probably is unrelated, but I don't know if it pre-Frisia, would Doggerland come into this at all in any way of the kind of setup for those links between the British Isles and Frisia?
I'm afraid not really. I mean, when we're talking the early Middle Ages, we're post-Roman, so Doggerland is dead and gone at that point.
I just figured if it was like a precursor in any way to having like links in any way.
Not to be like a super party pooper, Dan, but if Doggerland ever existed, it is supposed to have been flooded 8,000 years ago.
Yeah, no, I know that.
Okay.
I was more meaning I know it's like super old and before that, but I just didn't know whether there would be any, I don't know, prehistorical links.
Well, I mean, it's not quite prehistorical, but one interesting thing that might be interesting to mention is that I mentioned that the Roman period population, so people who are referred to as the Frisi and the Chauci and Frisiavones and various other names, they kind of disappear from the record. So it seems they pack up and leave, but it's often been wondered, well, where did they go? And some of the pottery styles that are being made in this area then show up in England. So it's possible that some of them might have actually gone over to England. And that might explain why there are a few sources. The most famous one is Procopius, who's a Byzantine historian and mad lad, but look into him in your own time. But he refers to Frisians. He's writing in Greek, so he calls them like Frisoi or something similar. He says that there are also Frisians that go over to Britain in this period. And it's sometimes been wondered, well, who is he exactly referring to? And it might be the case that some of these foederati or these, Germanic auxiliaries that are in England, we know Hadrian's Wall, which is kind of my neck of the woods, a few cohorts of Frisians are found up that way. So there are already some older connections. And that's something with these Anglo-Saxon migrations. It's sometimes wondered, were they already in place rather than the kind of classic image of they came in boats and they took everything and forced everyone to speak English. But maybe some of them were already there as part of this Roman army. And then we have some evidence that maybe some of these proto-Frisians or Frisi were over there. But they're by and large not the same population group as these later Frisians, who I'm mainly talking about, who are more related to these Angles and Saxons and Jutes, as we would call them.
Ooh, yeah, I see.
Wonderful. All right. Let's wrap up the main show and then we can do a little.
Okay, good. Just because I have there's so much info now that I'm like, I have so many questions.
Yeah. Oh, great. That's perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want to hear more, head over to our Patreon /Nordic Mythology podcast /1 £3 a month, less than a cup of coffee, and you get to access all the bonus episodes. So this one and all of the ones we've done before. But Hilbert, where can people find you primarily?
Yeah, I guess for I'm sort of wearing a different hat to my history with Hilbert, where I'm a bit of maybe more of a persona. It doesn't really go in as much depth. I mean, that's all on YouTube. I would say visit the exhibition when it comes out. Take a look at the.
What museum was that again?
It's at Fries Museum. I can write it somewhere. Maybe you can put it in the description after this goes up. So it's in the Netherlands, in Friesland, so in the north, in Ljouwert or Leeuwarden. And I think it runs for several months. The publication, which I've been referencing, will be out in February, and that's open access. It'll be online. So that'll be, you can take a look at that when it's up. And I think those would be the best places. I'm happy to recommend some literature. I yapped way too much instead of going to the sources, but I have a few things
that's
lying
what
around
the podcast is
people
for,
who are
Hilbert.
interested in. I suppose it is, right? Yeah. So it's all good. But there's several things, some academic, some slightly less academic. You can also read the story of Redbad in this wonderful comic strip, which came out not too long ago.
I love that, like the way that his name is spelled would be Redbad.
Yeah. He's a bit of a red baddie, you know. There's all sorts of jokes you can make with it.
Wonderful. Mags, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at ArchaeoMags, Archeo with a K.
Wonderful. And for me, it's Dan Does History, Horns Voting for the Business, and the Nordic Mythology podcast across the board. Max, you just something to say then? You inhaled.
I was just going to say that, like, I'm still not used to the fact that it's like now Dan Does History and not Dan _Farrand.
I'm not used to it yet either, but
he changed his username recently, and I'm like, wait, oh, right.
It'll take a while.
I got rid of the one. All right, let's wrap up and then we'll do a little bit extra.